And may I just introduce you then to Sarah, who I think is going to make the introduction. Ashley is in charge, Ashley Smith, who's on my screen, I don't know if he's on everybody else's, is in charge of WASP, and your local representative is Sarah. I think that's correct, is it?
Yeah, that's about right.
So over to you, Sarah.
All right, great. Let's just get my screen sharing. Keep your fingers crossed. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Very good.
Right.
Yes.
Can you see my screen, and can you hear me as well?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. That's that's a good start.
Okay, just before we go on, could I ask you all to mute your loudspeaker, your speakers?
Great. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Charles and Trudy, for inviting us to talk tonight about what's happening to the Windrush. As you've heard in the introduction, I'm Soraya, and I'm here really to give you a local perspective on sewage pollution. And I know some of you are really well up to date on these issues, but I just want to spend a little bit of time with this presentation to make sure we're all in the same place before I break into some discussion and questions, and hopefully hand over to Ashley as well to give you a more detailed picture. I know Charles's invitation went out quite widely, which is fantastic. So hopefully at some point, I'd love to know where everyone's from. I'm assuming most people are from Stanton Harcourt, but I see a couple of other names that I recognise from a wider area. So I hope in this local presentation I do cover your area. If not, please do let me and Ashley know, and hopefully we can expand that picture of what we're looking at in the discussion time afterwards. So great, we'll get started. So I'd like to start actually with a personal story of how my family came to WASP, as I think it hopefully illustrates the nature of the problem we face. So we moved to Northmoor back in 2013, and for a few years after that we helped out with testing freshwater sites locally for a local wildlife group. Actually, I think I saw Lucy's name on the attendees tonight, and it was with Lower Windrush Valley Project. So hello, Lucy. And we were helping look at levels of phosphates and nitrates in various water bodies locally, which was great fun. This is a picture of my son Alex, who was, gosh, I think he must have been about 10 in this picture, and that's down at Church Farm at Northmoor. And he's very happy and smiling because the water's beautiful there. We find that Church Farm, like many of our local lakes and ponds, they test really well in terms of pollution. They have very low or no nutrient pollution. The exception we found locally at that point in time was Northmoor Brook, which runs right past our house here in the village. And we were a bit baffled by that. We thought, oh, maybe it's our neighbours who keep ducks immediately upstream that's contributing to the pollution, but actually they'd be pretty sick ducks to produce the levels that we were seeing on the brook. So we thought perhaps it's a little bit further upstream. There's quite a few farms, you know, that feed into the brook. Maybe it's some farmers upstream, but actually it turns out that the brook is fed by the Windrush, and that the problems that we were seeing on the brook lie further afield. Coming on to this other photograph, this 2017 found us as a family on our hands and knees, literally beside Colwell Brook in Whitney, with pollution readings simply off the chart, as you can see here. These kinds of high phosphate readings that we were seeing reduce oxygen in the water, they reduce plant life. Plant life takes a direct hit when you get phosphate levels like this. And the whole delicate balance of the ecosystem is affected by this kind of nutrient pollution. We were really shocked by this, so we passed the results back to the wildlife group and asked at that point what we could do, and they very kindly in turn passed those questions on to the Environment Agency. And at that stage, I have to confess, I had no idea that there was a sewage works so close to where we were testing. I had no idea that that sewage works released even treated waste or treated effluent into the brook and into the Windrush, let alone untreated sewage. But I thought it's okay, because the Environment Agency are nature's police, and if someone's doing something wrong, they'll fix it. And so in 2019, so a couple of years later, we realized that the problem was still very much there and was one that Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, or WASP, were tackling head on. And that's how we came to be hooked. So I hope that gives you a little flavor of the background for us. The Windrush, I think, in some ways is a river that's hidden from many of us in the lower Windrush Valley, despite the name of where we live. Maybe like me, you see the Windrush occasionally as you drive over broad bridges heading into Stan Lake and up to Whitney, or maybe whizzing over Newbridge as you head south and over the Thames. So I'd like to take a closer look at some of the visible changes that we've been seeing on the river, and then I'll do a little tour, if I may, of some of our local problem areas. So this beautiful photograph is the Windrush back in 2009, and it's idyllic. The Windrush was famed for its golden gravel, its gin clear water, and absolutely superb fishing. This, I'm afraid, is a photograph of exactly the same location at Woodford just 8 years later. And I think this photograph really shows the visible changes that we're all seeing in our lifetimes on this river. It's visibly different water. It's full of sediment. And I think what's also really striking is the loss of plant life. And what you can't see from this picture as well, obviously, is the loss of fish and other life from within the water. Some of you may have seen this previously. This is footage from Newbridge in summer 2019, so summer last year. And we're traveling downstream on the Thames here. This is the Thames on the right, and the drone is lifting up and taking us on a tour upstream over the Windrush. And I think it's a deeply worrying sight to see such a cloudy Windrush meeting the River Thames. If anything, I think perhaps you might expect it to be the other way around. I think this really hopefully clearly illustrates that something is very wrong with our river, with the River Windrush. So now let's take a little tour of our local problem areas. And if I may, I'd like to start with what I'm going to call the Whitney problem. Whitney sewage treatment works, discharges into Colwell Brook, as I mentioned, and that then flows directly into the Windrush. This headline is back from 2016. You might remember there was a huge fish kill at Whitney that year. Over 1,500, so I think about 1,700 fish, if they can count them accurately, were killed. And there were very high levels of ammonia in the water there, discharged from Whitney sewage treatment works. This was a Category 1 pollution incident, according to the Environment Agency. That's the most severe type of pollution there is. And this 2016 was the year before my family were down there testing the water. And you remember from that photograph, we got results off the scale. I just want to raise a question, is that a coincidence a year later? Here we are again. This is Whitney hitting the headlines again late last year. So this is the end of 2019. We had a reasonably wet winter, nothing too unusual for the United Kingdom, I guess. We're a little wet island on the edge of the Atlantic. And for 4 months, Thames Water released untreated sewage directly into Colwell Brook, and then that flows straight down into the Windrush. So we've got 3 years between these stories. 3 years later, it's the same photograph from the BBC. These headlines really, honestly, when you search back, they start to feel quite routine. Now, this really lovely photograph is what you see in the water after sustained release of untreated sewage. It's called sewage fungus. It's actually a bacteria. And when you have release of untreated sewage, this sewage fungus coats everything. And this is a photograph taken from Colwell Brook last winter. What we've been seeing is that Colwell Brook and the Windrush are repeatedly hammered by chronic pollution at Whitney. This is what the Environment Agency has to say about water pollution. I'm just going to let everyone have a moment just to read that and digest. I'm hearing some gasps. Well, what have they done? What have the Environment Agency done in the face of both acute and chronic pollution to protect people or the environment at Whitney? And the answer is nothing. There's been no prosecution to date for the fish kill in 2016, and there's no action that's been taken after last winter's 4 months of pollution either. I think there's something very clearly wrong with the system. So let's move on our tour. I think we might have some folks from Stand Lake, but anyway, let's move on downstream to Stand Lake. And this is where Stand Lake Sewage Treatment Works is. As you can see from this arrow, it's on a really lovely bend of the Windrush. Actually, it's a very, very beautiful stretch of the river that we don't really get to see. It's not that accessible. Stand Lake discharges into the Windrush here, which is just a little bit upstream of where the Windrush meets the Thames at Newbridge here. So you've got the A415 coming down, and if you follow Mortimer Lane along this way, you'd be heading back up into Northmoor, and I'm kind of at the top of your screen-ish somewhere. So this is it. This is Stand Lake Sewage Treatment Works, which is where all the waste from Stand Lake and from Northmoor goes for treatment. I'm going to be frank, it looks awful, and it is. I've been there and seen untreated sewage flowing into the adjacent farm fields and the waste that is left behind. And also there, I've seen a sewage fungus coated river. It's cracked, it's neglected, it's a really awful testament to the water company. So for Stanton Harcourt residents, we're moving a little closer to your home. This is Stanton Harcourt Sewage Treatment Works, which is actually accessed from Sutton. So if you go down Duck End Lane, it's at the very end. And the outfall of Stanton Harcourt Sewage Treatment Works flows into Harcourt Brook, north of the treatment works. And we're not sure exactly where the discharges go. We think they go into Harcourt Brook and then presumably north in a maze of very small waterways that would end up, if you followed them, you'd end up, I think, down at Wharf Stream near the Talbot Inn at the toll bridge at Swinford. And it looks a lot better than Stand Lake, doesn't it? It's a very lovely, shiny, new looking treatment works, but looks can be deceiving. Please look closer. This treatment works is also cracked and leaking. And it's also a very big spiller. So in 2018, we have data from Thames Water that suggests Stanton Harcourt Sewage Treatment Works released over 20 days of untreated sewage across 29 different spills. That number shoots up for last year. So last year, there were 74 days of untreated sewage release from Stanton Harcourt across 82 spills. In fact, Stanton Harcourt Sewage Treatment Works, you guys have, you have the unenviable distinction of being the biggest spiller in our area. you come in at number 11 on a top 30 spilling league table for Thames Water for 2018. And just to put that in context, there are about 250 or so sewage treatment works across Thames Water's catchment. And I'm going to leave it to your imagination as to what happens or what goes into an untreated spill. So it's not just the 3 Ps, it's the whole chemical cocktail of 21st century living. And many of those chemicals are, of course, still present in much of the treated waste that gets released into our rivers as well. I think this picture might be a very familiar sight to those of us who live in lower Windrush Valley villages, particularly last winter. And this image really symbolizes the problem for me, the problem that we're talking about. Our water companies, such as Thames Water, make it sound like they're doing us a massive favor when they send in the tankers to prevent sewage flooding. And I appreciate that that is needed at that point in time, but actually the problem is really caused by chronic underinvestment and neglect, because our sewage system is broken, and rather than fix it, the water companies are using our rivers, the Windrush in particular, as a dumping ground. And this lack of investment in our future is all the more reckless, given the growing pressures on this creaking system that are already evident from population growth and climate change. What I'd like to show with this picture is that tankering and a dying river are really two ends of the same problem, because certainly, you know, agriculture and industry can play their part in river pollution, but WASP's investigations confirm that sewage pollution is the major problem for the poor health of the Windrush. In testing that we do, we see really high levels of phosphates, these nutrient pollutants, on the Windrush, and we see those in places where the sewage works are discharging. This photograph on the slide here, that's from our regular testing at Newbridge, and that was taken last year. And to give you a context of what the numbers mean there, anything greater than 0.1 milligrams per litre would be considered a high level of nutrient pollution, and that's a badly affected waterway. This is 0.68. And even according to the Environment Agency, somewhere between 60 to 80% of phosphates in our rivers come from sewage treatment. So they're not coming really from many other sources. It's really wrong to lay the blame at the door of agriculture. It's very firmly our human wastewater treatment that's causing this health issue. And as I mentioned before, these phosphates, they kill river plants and the invertebrates. They also destroy the places where fish spawn. So it means that the fish populations just very gradually over time disappear. You don't even see the fish die as you would with an acute pollution. And it's not just the Windrush. Our rivers need help across the country because they are literally failing their health tests. I think these are quite shocking statistics. 86% of rivers in England fail to reach good ecological status. And that figure is even higher in the Thames Basin, which is the Thames Water Company's catchment. 97% of rivers under Thames Water fail that test. And the Windrush is one of those. So what do we need? Well, I think firstly we need much higher standards of sewage treatment. The water companies need to put the health of people and the environment before their profits. And we need the EA the Environment Agency to prosecute when those companies misbehave. Thank you very much for listening so patiently to these slides. I'd love to kind of just pause there so that we can hear your thoughts. We have a really big fight on our hands. We've got a really big fight with these profit-seeking water companies and also with the agency that turns a blind eye to their chronic pollution. And I hope that we've got time for some discussion and some questions. So if I may, I'll hand over to Ashley. We'd really welcome your questions. And Ashley's a little bit further upstream in Burford, so he can give you a much bigger and broader view of the issues that are affecting the whole river. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed.